So today's guest is Duncan Hooper. Thank you, Duncan, for giving me your time today. I really do appreciate it. So you were a journalist who then moved into tech, is that right?
Well, I still am a journalist. I still do journalism and I do some tech and some product stuff as well. Yeah.
Okay. So I know that when I was doing my research, you worked for the Telegraph, you worked for Euronews, Microsoft, Bloomberg, is that
Bloomberg,
right? Yeah.
Microsoft, yeah, and then CGTN, the Chinese broadcaster as well.
All right. So you've got a wealth of experience in broadcasting and
Yeah,
obviously
so
tech as
I've
well.
actually done a newswire at Bloomberg, and I did a very short time at a magazine, which was a Euromoney magazine, and I did a newspaper with the Telegraph. I did a digital only, which was MSN with Microsoft, and then I did TV. So I kind of feel I've done the whole gamut apart from radio, but here I am doing a podcast, so it feels like perhaps this is a full house for me.
It might well be, might well be a royal flush or something like that. So I like to go back to the start a little bit. Tell me about your where you grew up, how you got into journalism, how you got into tech. I think that'd be really interesting.
So I think I probably always wanted to be a journalist. I mean, that sounds a bit trite, doesn't it? But I remember being 14, I think, and wanting to write letters to the newspaper about why Birmingham Council wouldn't let Warwickshire have floodlights at their stadium.
Right.
And I think I wrote into the Independent about a nightmare train journey I had once where there were no lights and the train was delayed by 3 hours and nobody knew where it was going. So I think I'd always kind of wanted to do this. Um, and I grew up, yeah, in the Midlands, not far from Solihull.
Yeah.
And I said I wanted to do that. My parents have both studied English at university. So I thought I'll go and study English because that's writing and I like writing. And, I'd written for the school magazine and I was fortunate enough to get a place at Oxford.
Yeah.
And I went there and worked briefly for a couple of the student newspapers and did things like write sports reports for the college and things. And and then I came out and I looked around a bit and I thought I'd like a real job where I can earn some real money. And
Hmm.
all my friends were getting jobs with these banks, so I thought this banking looks like a really good thing because you get paid a lot of money. So I applied for a job with JP Morgan, an
Yeah.
internship, and I got an internship with JP Morgan down in London, and I was in risk management, equity derivatives risk management. I don't know what you know what that is, but
I honestly don't.
no,
That's way above my pay grade.
if I may say, you don't ever find out because
Right.
it's a
Okay.
very, very, in my opinion, dry subject. And my
Right.
job was basically to look at sort of sheets of numbers with lots of zeros in them and make sure they matched other sheets of numbers with lots of zeros in them. And if they did, I could sort of, I had a stamp that said approved and I could approve them. But I thought this isn't really what I wanted to do. I thought this is going to be high flying and I'll be like jetting around the world. And, I didn't think I'd be stamping sheets of paper. So I went to HR and I said, look, this equity derivatives risk management thing, it's not quite what I thought I was coming into.
Hmm.
And they came back to me a week later, said, we've got some great news. They've got something else for you. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant. I wonder what I'll be doing. And they said, yeah, it's credit derivatives risk management. And it turned out
More
that
zeros.
yeah, there's actually more zeros. Genuinely, it's the same, but with more zeros. So yeah, after that sort of 6 months doing that, I felt maybe this isn't right for me. And at JP Morgan, they have obviously Bloomberg terminals, and I'd seen these things and thought this is quite interesting because they've got news on here. I
Hmm.
wonder if they might need someone. So I applied to them, and I got a job there, and that's how that was my lucky break, really, I suppose.
That's mad. That's mad. So you went from zeros to watching the news and applying for a job, doing something
Yeah,
completely else,
yeah,
something
and
completely different.
it was a brilliant place to start.
Okay, so what was the jump from there to the tech industry?
So, I mean, I've always been interested in the digital side of journalism. You probably know that journalism has gone through massive changes.
Hmm.
The media used to have this dominant position where it controlled the distribution of its content, and anyone who wanted anybody to see anything basically had to go to a media company and get them, whether it was on a newspaper or a magazine or television. They had complete control and they had pricing control as well. And then what happened was this internet thing came along, and suddenly all these barriers to entry that you had to have a physical newspaper or some space on the television airwaves went away. So that just completely changed everything. And that was happening just very early on in my career. So,
Right.
kind of when I first started at Bloomberg, we were using physical yellow pages to look up companies. And that changed very, very quickly. And so it was obvious this was going to be a thing. And my next job, I got taken by my former boss, who's Edward Roussel, who now runs digital for the Times.
Right.
And he asked me to go with him and work at the Telegraph. And they were just starting off on a digital journey. The editor there was Will Lewis, and he's now Washington Post editor. He was very keen to try some new things and experiment with this internet thing. So we did, and we got a lot of stuff wrong along the way, but it was very clear straight away that this was going to be a game changer. So I was in charge of the sort of news. I was digital news editor, I think was my job. So I was in charge of getting all the newsroom into the internet world and showing the reporters this new thing called Twitter, which they were all super scared of. Until a couple of them tried it and then said, "Oh, this is brilliant. We can just say whatever we want and no one changes our copy and nobody corrects us and we can talk as much as we like and people listen to us and they reply to us. It's brilliant." So they got on board. But then, so it was clear to me that was going to be a big thing. After the Telegraph, I went to work for Microsoft. They have, they still are, I think, in the top 5 publishers in the world with MSN in terms of size. And not many people recognize that, but thanks to the power of Microsoft, they're in a lot of places. So I think they have about 500 million users when I was there, which is, just extraordinary. And I got to work with some really, really smart product and tech guys there, and also help do some of the development work, some of the testing on their apps and things. And I got a real taste for that. So when I moved on from there to Euronews, I was a head of digital, and I just felt this is really where the media industry is. The problems the media industry has is not about creating the content. There are so many great journalists. You want to go and read great stuff. There's tons of places to do it. You want to go and watch, great video. There's tons of places to do it. The challenge for journalism was, how do you make sure that A, people see this stuff, and B, you can make enough money from it to fund what you're doing. And I, like many journalists, have been through lots of sort of very difficult times where companies have gone, look, we can't afford to do this, we have to cut jobs. So it was clear to me that was an area we needed to be in, and so I got to work on some of the website designs. I got to work on building some of the apps, and from there I picked up a few skills, not really through formal training, but just through hands-on experience. And and then now I have this opportunity where I am running media businesses, but also involved in the technology side with video, how we can use AI in video, how we can improve the way that we publish content, how we can help journalists to use technology both to, let's say, save them time, check their work, but also to make sure their work gets the widest reach possible.
No, and that sounds really, really sort of beneficial all round, actually. I know I publish a lot of my written work on Substack. It gets viewed a lot, but I'm struggling to break that 100 subscriber limit. And even then, it's free subscribers. So I get more views on my videos on YouTube, ironically. That's growing. I think I'm getting like three-figure views nearly every video now, nearly.
That's a really good subject. Sorry, I interrupt you, but
No, go.
that idea of the different formats and which formats work better is kind of central to what I do, because when I started, everyone had their own lane, if you like. You read a newspaper, you do written stuff.
Yeah.
You're at a television channel, you make video, and there was very sort of let's say, rails that you would follow and be in that groove. But the thing that's happened is audiences have really fragmented. And so you have older audiences that still really love reading stuff and will spend time reading stuff. And then you have younger audiences who don't really want to read at all and want to consume everything really as video. And so for someone like you, who's a creator, it can be quite difficult if you say, look, I'm not sure exactly who I want to target, or maybe I want to target a sort of range of people or a particular group of people who might be different ages and therefore different viewing habits. How do I do this? And how can I do it without essentially doing all the work twice or even 3 times to make a podcast as well as a video channel, right?
Yeah, that is pretty much where I'm at. So I think if you ask my wife, she's like my biggest sort of supporter. And she said, maybe you should write. So one night, I'm not gonna lie, had a little bit too much rum. Signed up to Substack, started typing, and people paid attention. I was like, hang on, this has been shared and followed. And a friend of mine was going to one of the protests, the migrant hotel protests, and said, "Do you want to come along and see what it's like? Maybe you could write about it." I was like, "All right." So I went along. Like, you just take the opportunity, don't you? I ended up through, I don't know, luck, dumb luck, or just the way it worked out, ended up video interviewing the organizer of the protest, like a few days after said protest. I went again and wrote about it, and then from there it's just developed, and here I am talking to you. My calendar gets full up, and I do this as in my free time, you know. And I think because I'm writing about current events, trying to keep up with current events, and I follow the news on various formats. So I don't just follow the videos; I do follow the written stuff as well. I tend to use Ground News. This isn't a plug for them; they're not paying me, but I tend to use Ground News so I can see where the bias is. And I watch some YouTube podcasters as well, to make sure that I ask different questions to what they ask. And I said to my wife, I said, actually, the videos, what I'm going to do, they're obviously not polished. I'm not going to edit anything in. I'm not going to edit anything out. So, like, I'll record this conversation, I'll put my watermark in the corner, and I'll just upload it. And they're getting silly views. I never thought I'd be this popular, ever, actually. So to follow on from that, it works. I use AI for silly pictures. Like, I turn me and my wife into John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John from Grease. You know, I wouldn't know where to start with it, using it for videos or anything like that. And I'd feel I'd break my own brand by doing that, because I don't edit. Everything's natural and raw and real, which is what I said to you off camera. So with the AI thing, we have talked about that briefly, or you've touched upon it, and I saw that. How do you see that being beneficial to creators going forward in the news media space?
Yeah, it's a huge subject, AI, because it means a lot of different things. Because on the one hand, you have generative AI, but on the other hand, you have kind of machine learning. So there are, there's many definitions, and I may talk for you for an hour on this alone, but
there's no limit.
Let me tell you about some, how I explain this in some training with some journalists. I largely split this into two categories of AI use, right? There's AI use on what I call the back end, and there's AI use of what I call the front end. Okay, and the distinction really is the back end is stuff that your audience doesn't really see, and the front end is stuff that your audience does see. Okay, so when you're saying I'm making pictures of John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John, that's the front end AI. Now, that at the moment is, I think, quite dangerous for media to use, or certainly risky, because it does make mistakes, and also people don't trust the machine still. So I did do some experiments with one of the channels I work on with using AI presenters. So instead of having human beings put into the channel, we used AI presenters, and they're pretty good. They're pretty good, but they're still, you can tell. And the problem is people look at that in the social media feed and they say, this is fake. And as soon as they say the person speaking is fake, they think what the person's saying is fake. And therefore you lose a lot of trust on your channels. And I think the social media channels as well. I mean, YouTube has a new policy on this about saying we don't want to promote content. We don't want to allow it to be monetized if it's made with AI instead of human beings, because we want to protect our creators and make sure they make money and they're not crowded out of the market by this AI. So they're pushing it down as well. And I think the media has an issue with trust already, as you will know. And therefore, if you see that the content is essentially fake, it can be very risky. So that's an area which I'm not saying it doesn't have its applications. There certainly are applications for it. I think particularly where you're using generic imagery to tell a story where you wouldn't have the pictures. So maybe you're recreating a historical event. One of my former colleagues at CGTN just made a video celebrating a British journalist who was in China during the Second World War. And they used a lot of AI to kind of recreate scenes from that, because obviously there's no footage. They were very clear that it was AI, and I think it sort of helped tell the story. But I think with current events, it's more difficult. And the second thing I said, the back end, that's a different story. AI is tremendously powerful there. I'm sure you use it all the time, Dean, just to check your work. Every time I write something, I put it in ChatGPT, and I don't ask it to, improve the writing. I say, are there any mistakes? Are there any spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, or factual mistakes? And it's like having your own, if you like, proofreading team. Now, of course, it's not 100% sure, but it's going to be much better if you can have a look at that and have a second pair of eyes effectively. And everything it tells me, I'm going to check. If it says, well, actually, you've got this wrong because you've said 300 people, whereas actually there were 500 people. I'm going to check that because I don't trust it, but it's given me a flag that I need to check it, which I wouldn't have done otherwise. So I think that's a really good use case. Transcription. You can take this interview. If you wanted to edit it down, you could just pull out a transcription straight away. You wouldn't have to watch the whole full video. When I started my career, I remember spending a lot of my time as a journalist listening back to tape recorded, those little mini tapes you used to get.
Yeah.
Tape recorded interviews and writing them out by hand and then going through and saying, oh, this is an interesting thing that I didn't catch when he said it. You don't have to do that anymore. You can transcribe it. And then further to that, you can also ask the machine, okay, can you bring me back this bit of the interview? Because this is the bit I want. So I don't have to scroll through and try and find it. It will do that sort of simple jobs for me. Something else we use it for in our work is for tagging. So you'll know when you publish something, you want to put a tag on it. Human beings are terrible at that. Journalists, I think, are even more terrible because they can't deal with equity derivative risk management. They're not very good at this kind of nitty gritty detail, so they don't tag things very well. Machines are really good at it. They can tell, okay, they know which tags you've got, which ones are relevant. They can add them automatically. We always check them. We have a system where the journalist can see which ones have been added and say yes or no to make sure nothing rogue comes up. But it saves a lot of time and particularly saves a job that most of journalists sort of hate doing. And it can also suggest headlines for us. So if you want to publish a story on X or on Facebook, you might want to use a different headline than you used on your article. And instead of having the journalist then having to think, where can I find 3 different headlines? The AI can suggest it and they can maybe give them 3 options and they can choose one. And that's another example where we're using it.
Wouldn't isn't so AI has been initially programmed by a human or humans at some point. So isn't there an inherent bias there? So for example, if AI was programmed by people who are predominantly politically left, it's going to have inherent bias it's not aware of, or if there are people that are on the right or in the centre, it's going to have that bias there regardless. How do you navigate something like that? I'm not sure who programmed ChatGPT or any of the others. That's why I only use it for silly photographs, to be honest.
I think the issue is less actually with the people that program it and more with the material that it learns from, what's called its training data. So these LLMs, they're called large language models, their knowledge, let's call it, is basically derived from reading a lot of stuff on the internet. And you may or may not be surprised to know, actually, the stuff on the internet isn't always politically, let's say, neutral. There tends to be a larger volume of covering certain subjects than others. One really obvious example is the internet's really dominated by English language. So English language viewpoints and viewpoints of people from the US particularly, but also from Europe, from the UK, are overrepresented in general on the internet because of this English language dominance. And one of my new colleagues, actually from Milton Advisors, they did some research on this, looking at chatbots, and we published it on Global South World, our website, and you can go and see it there. Actually, that's a plug.
We'll put a link in the bottom. It's fine.
Yeah, they found that the large language models in general are biased to the left because they're political researchers. They have tools and there's a test that you can use. And they said, yeah, in general, if you ask these large language models questions that you would ask people to determine their political allegiances, they come out as left. And they worked out, or they established, or they, let's say, surmised that this is because the information that they're training of tends to be more left because it's written by younger people, particularly older people, less well represented on the internet, and because essentially I think there has been a dominant discourse among let's say the tech establishment for a long time, which was more on that sort of, let's call it, progressive side. So yes, they're not neutral, and yes, that is something we have to deal with. How do I deal with it? My philosophy essentially is that you say these models are not neutral because they're written by people, and that's exactly it. People are not neutral either. So nobody is completely objective. Everybody has inherent baggage, background, unconscious or conscious bias that they bring with them. And I think as a media organization, you have to accept that. And there's a couple of things that you can do. You can say either openly, we are for this particular position. We employ people who support this particular position, and we will write from this particular position. And I think that's absolutely fine. Be transparent about it. Or you say, we're not going to take a particular position as an organization. However, we recognize that the people that work for us may have different political positions. And what we will try and do is set about rules that will reduce the amount of bias, or let's say provide balance. So I wrote about this on my Substack, which is really saying that instead of saying, let's try and be completely objective, let's try and actively seek out other views and make sure that we're representing different views in our writing, in our videos, so that although we personally may unconsciously be picking particular elements, we are consciously trying to find people who maybe have different views and bring them into the story, and try at least to give various perspectives. My opinion, my philosophy on this is that our job is to give information to our audience so the audience can make up their mind rather than telling the audience what to think.
No, and that's a really good way of progressing it. Excuse me. So, do you think that we should be concerned about the growth of AI? It seems to have exploded over the past. Well, it's not been around very long. Couple of years, few years.
I don't think necessarily being concerned about it is going to help. It is going to be here. It is going to have a massive impact. It's not something like we can just say, King Canute, like, let's just stop this. Let's send back this tide of AI. There's no way that's going to happen. It's too powerful. Everybody wants a bit of it. You cannot stop it happening. So, should you be concerned about it? I don't think concerned is the right word. I think cautious is a good word. Wary, you should be thinking about how can we make sure that this is beneficial rather than harmful. And a lot of this is going to be out of the hands of individuals. A lot of this does rely on governments taking
Hmm.
action, because let's face it, the incentives on companies developing AI are not always to be socially responsible. And I think
No.
we've seen that through the last era of the internet, where social media companies have not been incentivized to remove harmful content from their sites, because that harmful content makes them a lot of money, and sometimes makes them more money than very straight, serious, reliable, factual content. So the commercial incentives for them have actually, I think, encouraged, let's call it bad behavior, to be a bit subjective, but certainly encouraged them to do things which many people in society consider to be harmful. And I think we're going to have the same incentives for AI companies. And so I think the real question is, how can you and I as individuals make sure we're using them safely, make sure that we're not giving them personal information that, potentially could be harmful to us, make sure
Yeah.
that we're not overly relying on them, still checking stuff rather than just assuming that because the AI machine says it, it's correct. And also, governments have to step up and say, this is not going to be a Wild West. We are not just going to allow the most powerful technology to decide what we do, what happens to the lives of our citizens. We are going to put in place guardrails that are going to protect them, and ensure that rules are followed. There are some rules, and those rules are followed. It's a big job. It's very difficult to do, but
Mm.
governments have to grasp the nettle on that.
I think as a young lad and even as an adolescent, we've all seen movies like Terminator and the Rise of the Machines and things like that. And I think maybe that's instilled some caution in a lot of us, actually, because I think Skynet was an AI that controlled all the robots in
Exactly.
Terminator, and all the Terminator machines, and that didn't end well. And again, the Matrix, that was all AI stuff, and that didn't end well. So, just to bring it back to reality for a moment, getting off. Um, how do you think that AI and the media landscape are going to evolve together? Because that seems like they're going to be symbiotic going forwards.
Yeah, they definitely are going to be very closely intertwined. The most obvious immediate effect is there will be a huge flood of content, right? We've gone through an age where the amount of content available has just exponentially increased because the barriers to entry, which I talked about earlier, have been
Yeah.
removed. So in the old days, you had to be a journalist to be able to write things that other people would read, or an author. Nowadays, anybody can write things that people can read. And in your example, Dean, you can see that that's incredibly positive
Yeah.
for people because it gives opportunities. And but at the same time, that has been harmful for some people in the media industry who had entrenched interests. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's definitely a thing because the more content that there is to see, the more attention of the audience is divided, and
Hmm.
therefore the less the more the thinner or the thinner the slices of cake, I guess, that everybody working in that industry can expect to have. Now, AI potentially is just so much of a bigger effect um, than social media because it brings the cost of creating content down almost to zero. You could pump out 1 million Substack blogs, in realistically in a couple of weeks. Or I mean, in a couple of days, in a couple of hours, if you learn how to program or you use the AI well. So this is, let's say, a potential threat to media, but it's also an opportunity for media because as people start to realize that they can't trust this junk and the rubbish that is auto created all over the place, they should, and I say should because it's not, I don't take for granted that this will happen, but the value of quality, fact checked journalism should increase. There are certain things the AI can't do. It can't be on the ground. It can't be interviewing people. It can't be, out witnessing things itself. It's relying on other data sources to provide it to. So there
Yeah.
certainly is a place for journalism and journalists. It's not clear to me exactly how that will play out. There's a lot of panic within the industry because of what I said to you about the dangers that people's attention gets diluted so much that it becomes economical. My personal feeling is that there will be a lot of consolidation within the
Yeah.
media industry because there just won't be enough advertising dollars or subscription money to go around everywhere, and that will be very painful. But I also do hope that it will restore an element of um, belief in the value of quality media.
No, and that's a really good point. I think one of the other things that I was sort of thinking about is um, the censorship side. There are things that are not because of like political bias or whatever, but there are things that are left out of journalism from events that happen, for example. And AI doesn't seem to have that filter. It will just tell you things that have happened. I wonder how that will change things as well.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
lack of censorship,
yeah,
essentially.
I have been in situations in my career where I have had to take decisions which have been life or death, and it's a really, really hard place to be. So I remember at a time when we were in the Telegraph newsroom. It was very early one day, so the big bosses weren't in the office yet, and we had a call from a family of some people who've been taken hostage. I think it was in Africa, and they called us and they said, look, you've got to write about this. It's really important that you talk about our relatives because they are, they're being held for ransom. That we haven't heard anything from them for a long time. We need you to cover it because we think media coverage will help get them free. And so, the first thing we did was we phoned up the Foreign Office and we said, look, is this really the case? Can you confirm this? And the Foreign Office said, you must not report this. They said, if you report this, you put their lives at danger. You will endanger the people concerned. And that's a really, really hard place to be in. And you have to make a decision, and you have to check with experts, and you have to get guidance, and you have to really think about, do we want to do this or do we not want to do this? Because whichever decision you take, if you're wrong, people can die. So I do think it's worrying, yes, that these filters are gone. There were a
Hmm.
lot of measures in the past that were taken, in agreement with governments to, let's say, censor things, and sometimes that, I would say, was quite helpful. So there's a system called the D-Notice system where the Ministry of Defence can say to mainstream media, don't publish this because it was a matter of national security. If you publish it, you'll undermine, you'll put our nation at threat or our soldiers at threat. And that's followed by, of course, all the mainstream media. If those, as the media situation diminishes, let's say, and you do have people going and reporting anything. And we've seen a few quite high profile cases of missing people and of murders where we've had sort of citizen journalists going out and reporting things and getting it wrong sometimes.
Hmm.
It is dangerous, but I think we need to learn to live with that, and we need to learn to think about how we as individuals can become more, let's say, media savvy to make some of these decisions ourselves about what we listen to, what we share, how we react with this content, because we don't necessarily have the filters that we had before from those layers of media editors. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but there can obviously be bad outcomes.
No, I agree. And I think there is, I think, connotations with censorship. People always think something's being hidden, don't they? The public
Yeah.
at large. And sometimes, like you say, governments make these choices for a reason. So I would imagine that press outlets do the same. I mean, we saw, was it? I think it was Tommy Robinson said that he was convicted of journalism, but he could have biased a case. So it does. There was a reason things were done that way. So just thinking forwards, just to change tack slightly, um, what mix do you think has the most sort of future-proof potential? Looking at revenue models between subscriptions, advertising, e-commerce, partnerships, what do you think would work there?
I think it does depend slightly, but if you ask me to pick one, I would say subscriptions are the way forward. It's obviously been a shift the industry has been through, but it's a model, if you think about it, which favors the audience, the readers, okay? Because the readers or the viewers, whatever you call them, are the people paying for the content, which
Hmm.
means the content should be created and will be created with those readers and that audience in mind, not created in order to generate advertising, not created in order to try and sell something. So it's intrinsically the best model, okay? Because if you are, you're getting paid to display something or getting paid to sell something, you're obviously going to have an interest in trying to promote that somehow.
Yeah, of
And
course.
in the early days when we were trying to chase advertising and we were trying to get as many views as we could on our stories, we wrote some absurd nonsense, frankly, because we knew people would click on it and therefore they'd see the adverts and therefore we'd get paid. And I think it's lucky that many people in the industry sort of saw that and realized it for what it was and put a stop to it before these brands became completely trashed through the dirt. But it still has done damage to the
Hmm.
reputation of the media. And I think subscription is definitely the solution. But as I mentioned earlier, I don't think it can support as many media as are in existence now. Obviously, the other main downside of it is, what about the people who don't subscribe? What about the people who can't afford to subscribe or just don't want to? Do they then not have access to serious, credible, fact checked information? And that's a huge issue because often these are the people who need it most to exercise their democratic right to, understand what decisions they should be taking in their lives. And if they're sort of shut out from the quality media because they're not subscribing, this is very, very dangerous. What I hope will happen is I hope that as people start to use AI to search for information, the model that is breaking right now is the model where people would go to Google, they'd look something up, and Google would send them to a website. They'd go to that website. The website would make some money from advertising because they'd gone to the website, they'd seen the page, they'd seen the adverts on the page. They'd go back to Google, look something else up, go to another website. That model is breaking, okay? And it's breaking, frankly, because there's a better way of doing it. And the better way of doing it is that Google's going to go and get the information itself and bring it to the reader, so you don't have to go and make this journey past
Like
all
the
these.
Google AI thing pops
Yeah,
up with
the AI.
and gives you the option to click the links. Yeah,
Exactly. But of course, no one does, because why would you? Because you've got the information
yeah,
there. You
exactly.
like to know they're there so you can click on them if you want to. But actually, what's the point? Just trust it. Now, I'm not saying that's a great thing to do, by the way. I'm just saying that is an easy, practical solution that many people are going to favor because everybody's busy and they don't want to spend time clicking around and trying to, close down ad windows and whatever to get to content. So that model is breaking. What I hope happens is that as Google and ChatGPT and these other companies increasingly serve that need and make money off it, they recognize that they are going to need this flow of content to keep coming. So they need the media to carry on producing this material so they can provide it to people. And they therefore come up with a system where they are remunerating the media to do it themselves, whether that is because people are paying to use the search engines, or whether it's because the search engines are serving advertising and they're making money there and they're giving some share of that back to the publishers. I hope that a system like that will develop. And if it doesn't develop, I hope that regulators and governments will think about how they can make that happen to ensure that there is still a diversity of media available for, let's say, the people who aren't going to subscribe, the people who aren't news junkies, or the people who just can't afford to.
Okay. So, what is your personal view on the BBC?
Wow. First asked you what I think about AI, and now you've asked me about the BBC. They're both
Well,
very,
we're
very big.
talking about media outlets
Yeah.
and legacy media. I mean, I speak to a lot of people, and a lot of people won't come on camera. And a lot of people have said BBC's dying. I don't know how true that is. BBC as a state-sponsored broadcaster. I've heard people call it a propaganda machine, but it is what it is. It's there. It's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think they're trying to keep up with these changes that we've talked about.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they've been caught out quite a lot recently with bad press.
Yeah. I think running the BBC is an extremely difficult job. My old boss, Deborah Turnus, is CEO of BBC News,
Mm-hmm.
and she is an excellent journalist and an excellent manager. And I think the amount of material that the BBC produces, the level of scrutiny on them, they are always going to make mistakes. We're human. I think the best thing that you can do with make mistakes is put your hand up and acknowledge them, which I think they are pretty good at doing. I mean, they do quite often come up and criticize themselves. They will put themselves under scrutiny. The BBC's own journalists are often some of its stronger critics. I think from the perspective of a commercial publisher, it's always been a big challenge for me that I am providing information and I'm trying to get people to pay for it, but they can get very high quality information for free from the BBC.
Mm-hmm.
So as a commercial publisher, that's always a bit of a challenge, because I say, well, hold on, I can't afford to invest as much in my journalism because I've lost a lot of my readers to the BBC. And that makes it difficult for me to do such a good job, puts my existence at threat, and therefore that threatens the diversity of the media sector, because the BBC frankly is so big. On the other hand, what I was just saying to you is, I do think it's important that there is some avenue um, for people who aren't going to subscribe to, let's say, commercial media ventures to still get quality news. And it's a very difficult balancing act. I don't think, I haven't thought deeply enough about this to really want to wade into the issue, but I certainly can say I think the BBC do a lot of good work. I think that it's important that they recognize the point that I made earlier, that individual human beings and individual journalists are always biased, and that attempting to say we are always objective, our journalists are objective because they follow our rules, isn't a viable position. But I think they do acknowledge that what they're striving towards is to be balanced, and that they also are willing to admit mistakes. So it's a big subject. I mean, commercially is a subject, editorial is a subject. For local news, it's a subject. Are they positive or are they negative? Because again, it's the same thing. They challenge the local publishers in some ways, and they
Mm-hmm.
support them in other ways. It's a huge subject. But I think if I were working at the BBC, I think I would be very proud of what they do.
Okay, okay. Just one final question. Someone like me who's an up and coming creator or other media professionals, what what moves can they make to progress their brand in this day and age with things changing so very quickly, and obviously the use of AI as well?
My advice when I speak to people who want to get into the industry is find a niche, find a specialism, be really excellent at something, and distinguish yourself. Because while, yes, generalists are very much required, I mentioned to you earlier about the ability to make video. the ability to be able to write well, to write correctly, to be able to check facts, to know how to research, to do interviews. All these things are important working in the media industry. But actually, what's more important is choosing that you can find and reach an audience, because that's the actual hard thing. There's lots of people out there who are capable of editing a video to a standard, to writing to a standard. But can you show that you can understand any particular audience and that you can produce something which is valuable to them, that they will want to follow and subscribe to or spend their time on, because really it's about winning their attention. So if you can find an area where you feel that you are doing something which is not already served by the internet, and that's a difficult thing, right? Because there's a
It
lot of
really is,
stuff
yeah.
on the internet. But if you can find something you can do better, so that when you produce content, you aren't just regurgitating material which is already out there, which is what AI does, and which is what AI is going to do more and more and more and get better and better and better at. But you can find a way to produce something which is original. And the term I always use when I talk to my teams is adding value. You know, are you adding value to something that's already out there, or are you just republishing, repurposing? And I think, you know, the question that you should ask before everything you do is, am I adding value? Is this different to what's out there already? And will it appeal to a particular audience, hopefully my audience, so that I can regularly produce consistent material that they like? Because what you really want, your ideal situation, is not to do something that goes viral one day and then nothing the next day, nothing the next day, and maybe it goes viral again, because this is impossible to sort of manage, and it's just a case you're riding on luck. What you want to do is you want to produce something that people read one day, they come back the next day and they say, oh yeah, I liked that thing yesterday and I like this thing too. There's something that, you know, appeals to me about both of them. The same bunch of people come back the next day and say, yeah, this fits me as well. And if you can have an audience that returns to you regularly, it's much, much, much better than producing something that appeals to this big audience one day, this big audience the other day, because it means each day you're going out having to find a new audience instead of having one that actually knows you and feels close to you. And again, that's why I say the subscription model is a really good one, because it encourages good behavior from publishers.
Essentially, consistency is key.
Consistency, I think, is essential. Consistency and adding value.
Yeah.
So if you can consistently add value, you're there.
Duncan Hooper, thank you for your time.
Great pleasure.
Thank you. That's finished recording now. Thank you.